I prefer to read while seated. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much to Ricci Sensei again and Hirai for this opportunity. And beyond the rhetorical aspect of this first statement, the opportunity consists precisely in having given me the possibility to bridge from my medieval Renaissance studies, also on Aristotelian cosmographic tradition, to my more recent research activity dealing with the study of intellectual cultural development in the so-called Christian or non-Bad century. So it was really the opportunity to combine these two perspectives. A few words of introduction. I mentioned my recent studies on the non-Bad Christian century in the form of a collective project. This is the title. It is based in Lisbon and funded by the Portuguese Ministry for Science and Technology. There are three institutions. The main one is the Center for, today's Center for Global History. It's the Centro di Storia delle Marcia, the École Française and the Italian School in Paris and in Kyoto. A group of 11 researchers, including Professor Miguel José Pinto dos Santos. I'm one of the coordinators, the principal investigator is an art historian, Alessandro Cufrino. Briefly, we have 4 lines of investigations, from references to Buddhist system of beliefs and practices in missionary writings, Buddhist influence in Christian literature published in Japan, interaction between Buddhist missionary, of course Japanese visual culture and ceremonial practices. Finally, interaction between Buddhist and Jesuit scientific culture. Well, scientific culture is a buzzword, but let's keep it to make things apparently more simple. I am coordinating these latter. Jose Miguel is coordinating and involved in other, also in this one, but I think in Buddhist influence in Christian literature, exactly, published in Japan. As for the 4th line, we focus on the use of maps, but more importantly, on the construction of space, and in the really broad meaning of the term, cultural space, of which, of course, geography is just one of the layers. Recently, I've been working, and that's the reason why I'm here in Japan for a few months. I'm developing a research on the Sekai Chizubyo, in other terms, the maps of the world represented on Namban screen. And this latter part is also funded by the Japan Foundation. Now, some of the considerations that I'm developing here just belong to this reflection, originated in this collective project, and also, of course, from my individual research activities. I begin my talk. Over the course of the 16th and 17th century, the exchange and cultural mobility between Europe and East Asia experienced new levels of intensity. The wide-ranging mobility of people and artifacts led to a symbiotic development of concepts and ideas as expressed in both tangible and intangible cultural products. For example, European books, prints, art objects, scientific instrument maps became available in ever-growing numbers and circulated in East Asian context. While most studies on the subject have concentrated on a limited number of protagonists, such as in China, the very famous Matteo Ricci, Giulio Leni, in Japan, Bargnano, Pedro Gomes, Rodriguez, Carlos Spinola, among others, or on underlying their religious, political, economic motivations and strategies fully legitimately, I would like to put another set of questions to the fore, asking specifically, what cultural dynamics developed and evolved across the continents, focusing on the process of transformative exchange and knowledge reconfiguration that resulted from this increased mobility of people and artifacts. I would do this by focusing on the long-distance journey of cosmographic ideas and representations, in particular with reference to the Aristotelian Ptolemaic mundus, the universe, that is the sublunar and heavenly world created by God, showing the process of transformative exchanges that the Aristotelian, Ptolemaic, Christian cosmological vision went through from medieval and Renaissance debates and exegesis to their reuse and reception in the context of the Christian missions in Japan and China. Against interpretations that depict the cosmographic, written, and visual discourses originated and developed in the context of the Jesuit mission in Asia as something specific and original to early modern culture, I will briefly present the use of Aristotle's and pseudo-Aristotle's cosmographic ideas in medieval preaching and medieval theory of mission, highlighting the medieval roots of the use of cosmography, geography, and cartography in the service of Christianity, either in ritual as well as in missionary context. I would then also recall from, quite briefly I should say, from Auro's mid-15th century Mappamundi, that was at the center of my PhD research, trying to detail the way Aristotelian and pseudo-Aristotelian physics of the four elements and of the world did inform and was used in mid-15th century cosmography far beyond any theological debate. So if at first we will see the use of cosmography within theological debates, then we will show a contemporary use in an apparently similar context, but that has nothing to do with the theological debate. Once, through this representation from Auro, wanted to show and demonstrate the possibility of sailing from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, just to break it or make the picture more complicated. In the light of these remarks, you may say introductory remarks, I would then proceed to briefly analyze the specific reconfiguration and transformative change of the use of the Aristotelian Ptolemaic ideas of the cosmos, or better of the mundus, as they call it, in Jesuit writings as Catholica Veritas, Catholic truth, to paraphrase Pedro Gomez's famous work produced by the Jesuit in the missions of Japan and China. So now I will move to my first topic. Between the 13th and 16th century, the semantics of heaven and earth were part of biblical exegesis, as well as of philosophical reflection, courtly romance, visionary literature, and hagiography. In particular, the cosmos of the four elements were an important topic of literature and of the late medieval and Renaissance preaching, one of the privileged forms of training, transmission, and dissemination of culture for classes that had no access to scholastic education, or better, did not have access directly to scholastic education. Since the beginning of the 14th century, Dominican preachers in particular frequently used in their sermons images of the four elements, of the universe and the stars, and of the cycles of nature, metaphors that had their origins in centuries of allegorical exegesis of the Bible, with the goal of theological meditation. The exploitation of these metaphors goes beyond the allegorical and symbolic tradition to form a real corpus of cosmographic imagery that reached a great part of the faithful of Christian Europe. Giordano da Pisa died in 1310, Domenico Cavalca nearly so, and during the 15th century, the very famous Bernardino of Siena made frequent reference in their homilies to phenomena and experiences of the natural world. Supported by theories and texts of natural science, their sermons included and discussed simplified notions of philosophia naturalis, natural philosophy, with direct references to world maps, such as a lost one by Ambrogio Lorenzetti in the Palazzo Comunale, the communal, the palace in Siena, and this one, like this one, by Piero di Puccio, who was active in Tuscany between 1380 and 1410, depicted in the Camposanto Monumentale in Pisa. This is enormous, it's nearly 7 by 8 meters. In Piero di Puccio, frescoes, Godfather holds the Aristotelian Ptolemaic Christian century, you see. At the center, there are the 4 elements, the earth, water, air, and finally the sphere of fire. Then the moon, the planets, the stars, and the zodiac. The Aristotelian crystal spheres, or prime mover, and 9 angelic hierarchies. At the bottom, St. Augustine on the left and St. Thomas on the right hold a book in their hands on which is written respectively. I will leave you Latin, I will read the translation. The angels are, this is St. Augustine, and it's a passage from De Civitate Dei, book 11. The angels are produced by divine word, therefore they too are the light that is indicated by the term they, by the name they. And Aquinas. Ordo in rebus ad eo creatis unitate mundi manifestat, mundus animus dicitur unitate ordinis secundum quod quaedam ordinat ad arte. The order of things created by God makes manifest the unity of the world. In fact, the world is said to be one, in the sense that it constitutes a unity in which things are ordered in accordance with others, not with the other. But then, there is a further inscription that is worth reading. And unlike the others, not in Latin, but is in the vernacular, in Tuscan vernacular. The English translation is mine, so it's probably incorrect, but I might ask Greg later to revise it. You that look at it's literary, it's a kind of ad litteram translation. You that look at this image of merciful God, supreme creator, that made all things with love, please number, weight, and measure in the 9 degrees of angelic hierarchies, in the empyrean heaven full of splendor, the one God that does not move and is the mortal, who made everything good and pure. You lift up the eyes of your understanding and consider how order is the universal world, and with affection praise it that has created it so well. Plan to go to such delight among the angels, where each blessed is. In this representation of the world, you can see the glory, the bottom, the middle, and the top in this story. Preachers believed that such images were very effective in evoking in the imagination of the faithful their moral message in a concrete form, thus making it easier for their audience to internalize the message and also making visible to the faithful, especially to the lay public, the precepts and moral teachings that their sermons outlined with words. In turn, the concepts derived from natural philosophy that were transmitted in these sermons in the vernacular guided the members of the audiences, especially the illiterate, in decipherating cosmography beyond the allegorical meanings that the preachers attributed to it, sensing the order and the physical structure of the imago mundi. So it's a biunivocal link. In other words, while the moral message remained the primary purpose of preaching, the preacher's communication through cosmographical images could not fail to dwell on and comprehend the cosmographical contents of the imago mundi. Now, how far is this so different, or is this so different from the story that Matteo Ricci told in his work, late in the 16th century, on the advancing of the Jesuit mission in China, when he told that he decided to hang on at the entrance of the mission a map of the world, having understood that this might have catched the attention of Chinese spectators. We don't have the images of Ricci, but in Japan, we have an image of something very close to Ricci, to the description of Ricci. I call your attention to this part. This is clearly the church, and this is the rest of the mission, and this is the entrance. You see the Jesuit, the Japanese, the Jesuit reading with the Japanese. And now I call your attention on this one. What is this? I call this is another Sekai Chizubyob, of course derived from Ricci. And that's it. Of course, we are in the domain of the visual. It's hard, but I leave the question open for you. But I really think that this is a map hanged. It's the map of the Aristotelian, Ptolemaic, Christian world, hanged on the entrance of the Jesuit mission in Japan and in China. I would close this first section. Maybe I would leave this image. I never moved to the second part. And I would add a further element to our analysis by introducing the Franciscan Roger Bacon's ideas and theory of the usefulness of cosmography and cartography at the service of Christian missions. Again, something that seems to me very close, at least in epistemological terms, to dynamics that became common in the development of the missions, in particular those of the Jesuits in early modernity. Bacon studied at Oxford in the second half of the 13th century and may have been a disciple of Robert Grosseteste. He became Master of Oxford, lecturing also on Aristotle. Bacon's major work, the Opus Maius, contains treatments of mathematics, optics, alchemy, and the position and sizes of the celestial bodies, and on cartography and geography. In a specific chapter at the end of the, I don't remember, second or third book on mathematics. In the part that concerns exactly the mathematics, he wrote a long and detailed work on theoretical cartography that explained the methodology and cultural use of maps. And I would like to read some of his long considerations together. There is a very great advantage in knowing the places of the world, for place is the beginning of the generation of things, as Porphyro says, because in accordance with the diversity of places in the diversity of things. And not only is this true in the things of nature, but in those of morals and of the sciences, as we can see in the case of men that they have different manners according to diversity of regions and busy themselves in different arts and sciences. And it goes further. Not only philosophy requires this, the knowledge of places, but also theology, of which the whole sequence deals with the places in the world. Whence the literal sense rests on the knowledge of the places in the world, so that by means of suitable adaptation and similitudes taken from things as people meanings may be elicited. For this is the proper way to expound Scripture, as I have shown above in the example. But then it goes on again. This knowledge of the places in the world is very necessary to the state of the believers, and for the conversion of unbelievers, and for opposing unbelievers, and Antichrist and others. For because of different advantages to the state and because of the preaching of the faith, men are sent to different places in the world, occupation in which it is very necessary for those setting forth to know the characteristic of foreign places. If instead of putting here Roger Bacon, Franciscan of course, I would have put here a letter, one of many letters of the Jesuits, 16th century, they wouldn't be that far. We would not be that far. And we are instead in Europe in the 13th century. I would close this second, let's say, contribution, and I move to a further one. And I will just introduce you from our map of the world. We are in Venice in the mid-15th century. The map is oriented toward the south. It's an enormous map. It's 2 meters and 23 by 2 meters and 23 centimeters. 3,000 descriptions, hundreds of images. You can probably distinguish the Mediterranean, Europe, for the first time a circumnavigable Africa, and the theory of circumnavigation, and 4 corners. The map was depicted here, San Michele di Murano. If this is Jacopo de Barbari, very famous representation of Venice, this is Murano, this is Venice, and this is San Michele, where today the cemetery is. And this is now regarded by his contemporaries as cosmographus incomparabilis, cosmographer without equal. 3,000 descriptions, 200 long legends, 29 authorities, autores, quoted, hundreds of drawings, an earthly miniature by Bellini. 4 groups of, among these 29, 4 groups, theologians, natural philosophers, classical cosmographers, travelers. Now, theologians, cosmology, natural philosopher, cosmography, of course, including Aristotle. Now, I should skip, because Hero is advising me to reach the third part. My point is, if we look at these 4 corners, here we have St. Thomas Aquinas on the number of Helens, Campanus da Novara with the distances of the heavens. But here are long analysis in the vernacular that draws upon the natura loci and the proprietatibus rerum by Aristotle, or pseudo-Aristotle, as in the comments on commentaries by Albert the Great. And here on tides, using the same sources, including John Buridan. To do what? And this is the earthly paradise from taking on board the exegesis of St. Augustine, in which the paradise is a real place, but mostly a spiritual feeling. So it's not in the earth, it's in the cosmological part. But all this to do what? He drew on Aristotle's and pseudo-Aristotle's work through the intermediation of Albert the Great and John Buridan to prove that the size of the sphere of water and the sphere of land made it possible to sail, and reasonable and rational, to sail from here to here and the other way around. We are in a church, we are dealing with a friar, we are using Aristotle, while the others were using this kind of representations for theological debates. He was using this apparently the same shape to develop other kind of discourses. And now, indulge me and let me finish the last 2 pages. In the context of the mission, and of course, I'm sorry, he was doing this against Ptolemy. Ptolemy, for those that are familiar, believed that it was not possible to do this because the Indian Ocean was closed. So it was let's say, mid-15th century hot debate, so to speak. Now, in the context of the missions and the competitive interaction with both Buddhist monks and Confucian literati, the Aristotelian Ptolemaic Christian cosmography did not only offer visual images of astronomical and geographical configuration. They paved the way for the comprehension of the Christian Deus as creator and its significance within the theology of the creation, a pillar together with the salvation and resurrection of the Christian message transmitted to Confucian and Buddhist people. Matteo Ricci, Gomes, Foucault Hagen's, Carlos Spinola's explication of creation stand both at the center of their criticism either of Confucianism, Buddhism, or Shinto, while at the same time being one of the pillars of their transmission of the Christian message. According to them, these traditions were likely incapable of explaining the foundation's origins of the universe. Also for the reason they were regarded intellectually poor and incapable to lead human beings to salvation, as clearly shown by Paramore in his recent book. Within a circular way of arguing, by lacking a clear understanding of the origins and existence of the universe created by God, they were also necessarily weaker in explaining and detailing from a mathematical perspective the way the heavens function, to the point that this sort of equation has turned into a trope, either within Jesuit documentation, like the annual letters, known also as Annua, and too often uncritically reported in current historiographical debates. Quite briefly, this is a very famous letter. Somebody probably will also display this, so I would move. The idea is that we are in Miyako, and there is this kind of theater with the Kubo in the center, and the Jesuit and the Buddhist monk on the other, and they are performing this kind of theater in which the knowledge of the Aristotelian, Ptolemaic, Christian cosmography and cosmology resulted in a great advantage for the Jesuit against the Buddhist monks. It's a trope. I think that this is a clear fiction. I'm not denying that things like this might have happened, but as it is reported, this is more like a play for the use of a European audience. It's probably that they are referring to Spinoza. But this is, for me, it's a clear fictional construction. It might provide a sense of the use of these images and theories in that context. Now, I would say, and I'm cutting a little bit, I would underline, or I would like to argue, that the use and interpretation of this kind of Aristotelian cosmography in the context of the mission clearly implies a reconfiguration of knowledge under the perspective of the transformative exchange. While in Europe, scholars and theologians were about to be involved in a fierce dialogue concerning the systems of the world. In other words, and I'm just paraphrasing the very famous Galilean treatise much later, 1652, in which the geocentric, heliocentric, tectonic systems were at stake. In China and Japan, the geocentric Aristotelian Ptolemaic Mundi principally sustained the very idea that the world was created, or it's a question that I'm raising, created by God, in competition with Buddhist, Confucian cosmological views of the cosmos that I take for granted, so I don't indulge in them. As we have seen, according to the very writings of the Jesuit, the Aristotelian theory of the four elements and of the sublunar world and the geometrical predictability of the astronomical phenomena made it instrumental to convince the Chinese and Japanese and Chinese interlocutors of the rational plausibility of the Christian cosmological vision as a whole, with respect to irrational, into quotation mark, Buddhist cosmology. I would like to, I would not go any farther, since the other speakers in the following will speak about this topic. I would like just to add a few visual documents that I would like to read with you under the perspective of visual bilingualism, to quote Francis Yockey. Look at this view. On this side you have China and Korea, but on the other side you have these diagrams. This is in Kanshinji, near Osaka. This is at Berkeley. And of course, this is the map of the world. But look at these other diagrams, underlining, calling the attention on the spherical shape of the world and on the Aristotelian. Of course, here there is also the Gokaido. But then, so the question is, these are Sekai Chitsu Byoku, but what is the real meaning? Why this insistence on this kind of diagrams? And I would conclude by, again, to train this bilingualism. These are passages from the spiritual exercises by Saint Ignatius, and in which the composition logic, so the composition of the place as a form of initiation, is explained. And for sure, this is a text that is very well known to any Jesuit. So you have to imagine the world surrounded by people. And in another passage, the same thing. And what is this? This is another Chitsu-byoku. The world and the people. The world and the people. I'm not at all saying that these are spiritual exercises, or were part of spiritual exercises. But I'm just saying, or this one that we have already seen in the Nanban Bunkankan. This comes from Ricci. We don't find this element from Ricci. I'm just saying, for a Jesuit or somebody that is trained as a Jesuit in Japan, what kind of understanding you might provide to these images? Of course, there is the representation of the world, but there are elements that invite one to reconsider them as part of possible meditative patterns that can be traced back either from antiquity, the dream of Scipio, or medieval preaching, and I think in a line of continuity with the Jesuit experience in the missions in Asia, in China, and Japan. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Angelo. It was wonderful and very radical and interesting presentation. We would like to ask many questions, but because we are a little bit out of time, maybe
we go first, Miguel, then question together, no?
Maybe we could ask questions.